Oh, great. There it is, filmed in front of a live studio audience. It's the Dicebreaker Podcast with your host, Matt Jarvis.
It turned out all we needed to silence you, Wills, was you.
I'm
Hello.
my worst enemy, as always.
It's Friday. I'm Matt Jarvis. Welcome back to the Dicebreaker Podcast. We're live, unless you're listening to this on catch-up, in which case we were live. Wills and Alex Meehan for the Dicebreaker team. Hello. How are you both doing today?
Let's both answer at the exact same time, Meehan. 3, 2, 1, go. Hello, Matt. I'm feeling very good, thanks.
I didn't know what you were going to say. I didn't know you were going to do a whole sentence. I thought you were just going to say one word.
This is like the mind, but for conversations.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, hello. It's good to be back. I can't remember the last time I was on this. I feel like it's been an age. Was I on last week? I don't know. Gen Con was in there somewhere. Wizards Presents happened at some point.
There's been a lot going on.
House has been full of cats
from going live, but we're back.
We're back
by the scraps of our teeth.
Matt wrote on the podcast document "cat" in all caps, and immediately I thought, is he going to talk about the 2020 film
Cats, which you can watch if you've got a Dicebreaker Plus membership. You can watch along with the film Cats. But no, in fact, last time I was on the podcast, I believe, was with Maddie, doing a sort of post-Gen Con thing. And I say teased as if it's a Dicebreaker related thing. I said at the time that I was going to go pick up some cats. And since then, my wife and I have picked up some cats, a family of 5, a mother and 4 kids. We have fostered them. I can't say more than that because we're fostering them for a charity and they're like, hey, please don't share any pictures and stuff like that, which is fair enough.
They're like, this Matt Jarvis, he's just in it for the clout.
They just recognized me. They saw I was verified on Twitter and they were like, he's a wrong one.
Hold on, we'll
let this man talk about cat. We'll let this man look after some cats.
I will say this as well. Matt Jarvis is verified on Twitter and he doesn't even use it.
It's outrageous. Disgusting. I've got over double his followers. Twitter. What's going on here? Sort it out.
Look, they just see it's quality, not quantity, Wills. And luckily, I avoid the quality question because I just don't tweet. But my DMs are gleaming. Yes, we fostered some cats and they're now off to find some new homes. It was very sweet and I recommend that folks, if you can adopt cats, you should adopt cats. And if, for instance, you can foster cats on behalf of a charity, you should do it because it's a nice thing to do and very heartwarming. That's my cats segment. Let's get stuck into it because we've got a lot this week to talk about. But first of all, let's start as we always do. Let's chat about some of the stuff we've been playing recently. Alex Meehan, would you guys kick us off, freshly back?
Yeah. Hello, I'm streaming from heaven, or possibly that one scene at the end of Return of the King where Frodo wakes up and Gandalf's there, and it's all very nice.
Laughing.
Yeah, everyone's laughing. Yeah, Kermit's there. I remember that distinctly. Hi. I've not been on the podcast for weeks because things have been happening in my life. I live somewhere different now, so that's why the background is different. I've not just superimposed it. But over those last few weeks, I've played a few things. I've not played a huge amount of stuff. A few weeks ago, we played a game called Rush Out, which is quite fun. I believe, oh my god, who is the publisher? I can't remember. It will come to me at some point. Matt Jarvis just sat there, his mouth opening. Do you know?
No, I was trying to remember. I recognize the name Rush Out, but I don't remember who it is. I'll look it up while you describe your experience with it.
Okay. It is a game where it's like semi-co-op. So one person is playing like an evil wizard of some sort. And then the other players are playing heroes who have kind of invaded the wizard's domain, let's say. And now the wizard is like, I'm going to get you. And then the others are like, oh no.
Kids.
Yeah, you kids. Get off my magical lawn. Yes, Matt Jarvis.
It's by Sit Down Games. They of Magic Maze and House Flippers, and one of the games we played at Gen Con, Redwood, which is the photography game.
Oh, I thought it was something like that. Anyway, so the person playing the evil wizard, which I didn't do, but a few of my friends sat in the position, basically plays against like a deck of cards, and they want to play spells and things to try and like stop the heroes from escaping and to get them. So essentially they're just trying to like play combinations of cards in order to complete their various spells. So they have like a series of objectives to complete before they can win. And then the other players, so the team who are working together, are basically trying to get through the dungeon and out. So this deck of cards will have like requirements of, oh, you need this many symbols and things. So by the way, I've completely got this wrong. It's dice, not cards. You have cards, but you have to roll dice to get the symbols, not play cards. So the person playing the evil wizard has to roll their dice to try and get the symbols for their spells, and the people playing the dungeoneers need to roll their dice collectively to try and get past the different obstacles. But the wizard at various points can play cards to try and like mess with the other team. So like be like, oh, you can't complete an obstacle until you've done this thing, or you can't roll this thing until other people help break this spell that I've cast on you, things like that. So it's a very frantic dice rolling game where it's just essentially which side is going to achieve their objective first. So it's really straightforward. We did play the easiest version of the game. There are more complicated versions that add more mechanics to it.
Does it like, they're different to know? Because that seems to be something that Sit Down Games does, that it did it with Magic Maze, and it's doing it with Redwood, where it like layers in, not Redwood, what was the other? Gardeners, where they like layer in that. So is that similar, like you almost like a tutorial set of levels?
I won't call it a set of levels. It's like you can add certain cards in to make things more complicated for both sides. So I believe we played the most simple one, and I think we played a slightly more complicated one. But we tend to find that it was quite difficult for the sorcerer to win. But that might be the case on the easier settings, or it was just, a lot of it is luck because it's what you're rolling. So like I can't confirm or deny whether the difficulty was balanced or not. But we played quite a lot of it, and it's just one of those games that's very quick and very frantic and chaotic, which then makes it fun to play. It was good. I wouldn't say it was like amazing, but I liked it.
It sounds cool. I like those kinds of games where you just are rolling like very quickly or trying to do things against time pressure or pressure of opponents, and it feels, well, the way you're describing it sounds like it fits into that kind of category.
Yeah, it reminded me of 5 Minute Dungeon a lot. Similar, but that's completely cooperative. You're playing against the dungeon, and you're just sort of you're playing cards collectively to try and overcome different obstacles and everything. So it reminded me of that. I think this one might be better because it adds the element of the player taking the role of like the bad, the enemy, whatever. And the artwork's nice. It's bright and colourful. The different dungeoneers are different animals. There's like a sloth one, and there's like I think there's a tortoise.
Are they all slow animals, but trying to do?
I think that's the joke.
That's fun. Okay.
Yeah. So we played Rush Out. I've also played a lot of Jaipur.
Great game.
I think I've talked about before on the podcast, but it's a 2-player game where you're basically trying to collect different sets of cards and then sell them for points. And so I've been on holiday, just in case people wondered whether I just floated off into the ether. I took the ships off into the afterlife. No, I went on holiday and I brought 2 games with me. I brought Jaipur and I brought Fox in the Forest because
another great game.
I went on holiday with my parents because they offered to help me pay for that holiday. And my father refuses to play any games whatsoever.
Oh, my mum's like that. She's just like, okay, so this is a game. Oh no, this is too complicated. I can't.
It's not even. It doesn't even get to that point. It's like I just won't. He's like, I hate games. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
My mum likes games, but she finds it really difficult to understand how to play games unless they're like ones she's very familiar with or really straightforward ones. So I've been slowly sort of chipping away at her with various games. So I know she likes Rhino Hero.
Mm-hmm. Who doesn't, honestly?
Yeah, that's a good one. She likes Camelot.
Mm-hmm. Great. That, like, my mum also loves that game. I feel like that's a good one to introduce to parents. Like, it's just.
Yep. She likes Telestrations. Kind of party games generally like a good shout. Obviously, that wasn't an option here because it was literally me and my mum. So I was like, okay, what 2-player games have I got that she will be able to handle? And we played Fox in the Forest in the past, despite her insistence that we haven't. And I was like, I promise you we've played this before. And she, no, okay, right. Obviously someone's implanted memories into my brain or something of playing Fox in the Forest.
Are you some kind of deep state agent, man?
Yeah. Yeah, the problem is playing Fox in the Forest is actually a trigger. So then when that happens, I suddenly go into like full, Jason Bourne mode. Yeah. So yeah, we played Jaipur and Fox in the Forest together. And initially I was worried because I'm like, okay, I thought Fox in the Forest would be easier for her to understand because she understands trick-taking games. And Fox in the Forest is basically just a trick-taking game with a few added aspects to it where it's like, oh, some of the cards do special abilities and the main sort of driving force of it, which is you want to win a certain amount of tricks by the end of the round. She found it very hard to get her head around those two elements. And I was like, okay, I didn't expect this one to be the more difficult one. Jaipur, she seemed to get fairly quickly, which I was shocked by. But she loves Jaipur now. She's fully on board with that. And she even got on board. Initially, she didn't like Fox in the Forest because I kept winning. And then she finally won a game. She was like, oh, I like this now. And I was like, okay, right.
The classic turnaround.
Yeah. So we played a lot of those 2 games, which are really good. We also played a lot of Rummy, which is just a classic card game for 2 players. Where it is just 2 players, right? Rummy, pretty sure.
You can play Rummy with more people, I think. It's just looking to collect sets.
We just played a lot of that, which we often do. And then my friends and I played and finished the Quarry a few weeks ago, which is the new horror video game from Supermassive Games, which are the people who make Until Dawn and all those sort of things. And my friends and I are big fans of those games because they're the kind of games that we can kind of get together as a group and just play through. And we we started playing in the afternoon, and we got through a decent amount by the evening, by the night, and then we managed to finish it the next morning. And it was good. Yeah, it's not as good as Until Dawn, but I have a great affection for that game.
That's the story of all those games that they've put out since that. It's like, yeah, this is fine, but it's not Until Dawn.
I mean, the difference is the other games they put out that are like that are part of that series of Dark Pictures, which are technically they're smaller, shorter games that were made in a smaller period of time, and therefore, I don't expect them to have the same kind of level of quality and like length as Until Dawn, because technically they're different. But the Quarry is a full $50 game experience, which is about as long as Until Dawn, and probably maybe had a similar budget. I don't have the facts in front of me, but it was originally meant to be for the Google Stadia, but when that went down the toilet and Google were like, okay, we don't want this, lucky enough they managed to publish it. And it's good. It looks really good, apart from the water graphics look really bad, but everything else looks really good. The story is a bit predictable, but it's fun. I think the characters might be better than the ones in Until Dawn, but the story's not as good. So, and it's easier as well. But yeah. My parents got a new puppy.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah. He's because our other dog sadly passed away, and we got another puppy, and his name is Rusty. He's very cute.
It's baby animal season here on Dicebreaker.
It is.
It is baby animal season.
The people at the charity were literally like, "It's kitten season."
It's kitten season, baby.
Yeah,
I will say. Out when I was on holiday, we saw several pregnant cats. So, kitten season, baby.
Yeah, kittens everywhere.
That's everything I've played.
Excellent stuff. All right. Well, it's good to have you back. Wills, I'm going to jump in next because you've got a longer list than me and it's more interesting. So I'm going to just whiz through.
But yeah, go ahead.
I'm saying yours is more interesting than mine. Because I haven't played loads this week. I've mainly been preparing to play things. One thing that I have managed to play, sort of, is Village Rails, which,
is it a train game?
It is a train game.
It's a Matt Jarvis game.
It's been a while, but Train Game of the Week is back, baby. This is from Osprey Games, who make, they make Frostgrave and Stargrave, the miniatures games, as well as things like London, which is a good game.
London's a great game.
And The Lost Expedition, which I also quite like, and bits and bobs like that. But this is it comes in a very compact box, and I think it maybe has the best tagline I've ever seen on a board game, because a lot of board games don't have taglines. It's just like, here is name of game, here is designer. They don't have like a snappy little cell on the front. But this one is a game of locomotives and local motives, which I think is like a really good tagline. The game is a little drier than that maybe suggests.
I'm shocked by the title Village Rails.
I think this is technically a spiritual successor of sorts to Village Green, which I don't have loads of experience with. I kind of only know by name. But this is a game where you players each have a grid. I think it's 4x3, and along both sides they have the start of train tracks. And on your turn, you can they are double-sided cards in a market, and one side is train tracks, and one side are kind of like scoring conditions, I suppose. And on your turn, you have to take a track and place it in your grid, and you can choose whether you want to take an objective. And when you take either, you pay coins to the market, you place them along the remaining cards in the line. So when you take one, you also get coins that other people have placed. So if you take something further down the line, they are cheaper, but obviously if you want something quicker, you'll need to pay up. But anyway, the main bulk of the game is placing these tracks into this grid, and you have to build the tracks as you go. So you have to start from the edges, and you're basically building either from the side or from the top to one of the remaining edges that don't start with tracks on them. And once you hit an edge, you then score for that track, and you score that track based on icons on those track cards that are actually in the grid, and then the scoring cards which you assign to basically the edges of the grid, and you can have up to 2 of those scoring conditions on a track. So when you score it, you score the icons on the track, which could be like, you have 4 signals, so you get some points for having 4 signals. But then those scoring conditions might be like, okay, have 5 of one terrain type, so you might want only fields or only wetlands, or it might be start and end in a wheat terrain, and stuff like that. And that gives you money, that lets you buy more, and you also have cards in your hand that are then like additional like ways to gain money that are called terminus cards. So it's like fairly straightforward, probably more straightforward than that description sounds, because you're basically just like adding track pieces, forming a track, and then scoring for the icons on it and any scoring objectives you've added to the edge. But it's like a really small box. It plays fairly quickly. We were playing with 2 of us, and yeah, I liked it. It does exactly what it turns up to do. I don't think it's massively groundbreaking. Like I said, I haven't played Village Green, so I don't know. It might even be similar to a game that already exists. But it was just one of those satisfying games where it's like you build from A to B, you then score for the stuff, gives you points and money. Easy as that. Get to the end of the game, most points wins. But it feels like the kind of game that would be good to just feel like half an hour or an hour here and there. And yeah, it's got like a nice art style. Like the production is good.
So you're
I enjoyed
telling
it.
me that this is not a Game of Thrones style political intrigue game about
Called Village Rails.
trying to get one over on the local rail barons.
No.
Like you're at the Women's Institute afternoon tea or
Power Hill,
something.
Jackie Weaver, or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean in that, like, when it says like local motives, it's a little drier than that, because I think that is just those scoring objectives on the edge of the board.
I would love to play a board game where like you have like a very like straightforward thing, like, oh yeah, you build little railway tracks or whatever, but you're at the whims of some petty little village council. Who are like, you can't put that there, it's too close to my petunias.
I mean, that would be fun, and that's almost what the tagline here sells, which I don't think quite lives up to the game. But the game is still good.
I love that as a theme.
Yeah, that would be fun. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. Other than that, I haven't played loads because it's been a very busy week full of cats and work, as we'll get onto in a moment. But my RPG group is going to play Deadlands next Tuesday, which I'm very excited about because I like Deadlands a lot. And I haven't played since we played on the channel like 2 years ago now. Yeah, ages ago when that game first came out. So I'm looking forward to that. And also because it's my birthday this weekend, I'm going to absolutely exploit that fact. And hopefully get my friends to play Twilight Imperium with me. Oh yeah, because since we saw Twilight Inscription at Gen Con, I've been like,
desperate to play.
I really want to play Twilight Imperium again. It's been a long time since I last played. At one point when we were moving house, I had Eclipse, which is another massive box, big space game that I loved a bit, and Twilight Imperium. And I was like, only one of these can stay. I only have room in my life, in my heart, in my cupboard for one big space game, and I went with Twilight Imperium, and I haven't played it since, but I am absolutely itching to get back to it. So yes, that's my plan, is to coax my friends into it by being, I only turned 30 once, please, come on.
We're not a crown, baby.
Yes, so I've played one game this week, but I'm hopefully playing more games this weekend.
Yeah, a rambunctious amount of happy birthdays in the chat for Matt, please. And also a big happy birthday to Maddie, who is currently off work.
Yes, happy birthday.
Happy birthday. And also, it's just everyone's birthday apart from mine, basically. So if you can see someone on the Dicebreaker team and they don't have a brown hair and a beard, you've basically got brown hair, Matt. Whatever, we look too similar. Anyway, it's not my birthday, but it's everyone else's birthday, so wish everyone else a birthday. Shall I crack out what I've been up to this week?
Go for it.
I was writing it down, and I was like, I didn't think I'd done too much, but actually, because it's been a little while since I've been on the podcast, so I've like racked up a few things. But I think the last time I was on the podcast, I spoke about prepping for Printweaver. I am now playing Printweaver with some friends. Matt, we had a whole debacle around getting one of these, but I finally found
you managed to get one.
So these are, for anyone listening, I have in my hand a big roll of hex paper because I wanted to we're doing like a sort of hex crawly kind of thing with Printweaver, which, if you're not familiar, is like a sort of OSR, Dark Souls inspired like game based on palmistry. Like a very, very sort of like old school RPG. It's very cool, but with lots of very, very newfangled ideas in it. But I wanted to do like a big hex crawl map that we would like explore as we went, and like I would just piece together as we went through it. But the only thing I could print off was like a crappy little A4 page, and I saw at Gen Con they were like, oh, they've got these massive hex mats. That's perfect. I can't find anywhere in the UK that sells them online anyway. Like, went to the friendly local game stores, went to Amazon, went to all of the like online retailers and stuff, and you can only get them from like American stores for absurd shipping costs. And then I was like, yeah, they've got them at Gen Con, and then our flight got cancelled, and I forgot to pick one up.
An exciting end to Gen Con.
It was a terrifying end to Gen Con, which thankfully went really, really well, thanks to two incredibly lovely women at the airport. But I was sort of like talking of my tribulations to my playgroup, and one of the players was like, "Oh, I googled it and I found it," and I was like, "Oh, for God's sake!" But the weird thing is, this is not like a retailer who sells Hex maps. This is a custom wrapping paper company, and someone's uploaded a hex print pattern. So this is a roll of matte paper wrapping paper. Yeah, it's wild. Hello, Tete. And then I got like a black ribbon to go around it as well. What I want to do now is I want to get some wooden dowels and attach them to both ends of the thing,
like
so
a
I can make it like a scroll. Yeah,
I like
which
that.
I think would be sick as hell.
Look at my scroll.
My scroll.
Unfurling it as you come to the
Exactly,
table.
like rolling it out on the table. Oh, that's the dream. That is the dream. What do you mean, Toto or Rosie kind of like? That's quite clearly Toto.
Oh, look at him.
Speaking of cat season, kitty cat season. Yeah, so I've been playing Printweaver. Printweaver is very, very cool. I'm getting to grips with like OSR as a thing, you know, like I feel like I've written about and read a lot of OSR, but I've never really properly sat down and played one, and it is like a very different experience. Like, there's a lot of things where I'm like, I was speaking to Maddie about it like over lunch. It's like you kind of have to unlearn a lot of stuff that you've kind of gotten used to through modern RPGs. But yeah, no, it's been really, really interesting, really, really cool. It's such a fantastic setting. Like, it's so rife for making up your own stuff to pop on top on as well. But apart from that, I also have been playing more Decorum, which is I'm in the process of writing a review of, which is why I'm playing through it quite a lot. Matt, could be the game of the year.
It absolutely is.
Was
one of our favorite games of Gen Con.
Covered initially.
I believe you did write the story about it, Ian. Yeah.
Oh, it's the decorating one, isn't it?
It's the aggressive decorating game. It is phenomenal.
I thought it sounded good, and
Speaking of another game,
that
has like incredible. A good tagline, but actually fully delivers on that tagline.
Yeah, just like fantastic in every regard. Like even the writing, which is not something we were expecting, is just phenomenal. So I'm playing through that. I'm playing through the 2-player campaign with Zoe, and then every now and again when I'm in the office with it, we're trying out the 3 or 4 sessions, me and so if we're ever over a lunch together and you fancy a game of that, then let's do it.
I would love that, because ever since I saw that and then did the news piece on it, I was like, this sounds like such a good concept, but it's really good to hear that they've actually like pulled it off.
It's really good. Yeah, it's Floodgate Games. I think you're asking which publisher it is.
Yes,
so the Sagrada people and Bosk as well, they did.
Hello, Rosie. Got all the cats are here now.
They're all here, yeah.
Yeah, playing a lot of Decorum. Decorum is fantastic. I think we're going to be playing more of that this weekend. I also played quite a bit of Similo.
I'm Dicebreaker's #1 Similo fan. You, Gen Con, you were like, I love Similo. Like, if you see the new Similo sets, let me know. But horrible,
horrible
guild. Are they horrible guild now? They called something else. I can't remember what they were called and what they were called.
They're horrible guild, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't have any Similo. I spoke to them. They didn't have any at the show because I was looking for words' sake because I was meeting. I was
like, as a journalist, it's like it's my destiny to cover every single Similo deck. I think
the ultimate ranking of all Similo. How many are there now? Like 24 or something.
Like, there's history, fables, animals, cute animals, spookies, myth. Something else, like it's almost like top trumps, like it's got that because they were originally in those
licensed ones yet.
There must be some licensed ones at some point.
I gotta imagine.
I can't believe Disney haven't done something with them, you know.
I don't think there is a licensed one because Horrible Guild just don't tend to do licensed things.
That's true.
I think it's the money. I just don't think they're like it's worth the cost of trying to get the license for something.
There is
a
Harry Potter one.
That
is a disappointing license for it to be, but there is a licensed one nonetheless.
That is the bin.
That is the only one as well. That's what a letdown. But anyway, that won't be making the rankings. like it's just such a fantastic little party game, and like I've introduced it to so many people who just don't give a single crap about board games, and they instantly love it. Like it's
because it's so simple, right?
Well, it's not even that. I think it's just such a compelling like conversation for people to have of being like, I think it makes people feel really smart, which is really, really nice. Like it makes people sort of like focus on the character aspects of stuff that they're aware of without feeling like they're being left out by the game and stuff, which I think is really cool. Like it's got that same hook as Codenames, where it's just like anyone could enjoy this, you know. Yeah, I love some of those, so I want to get the spooky deck. But outside of that, I've also been playing some video games. I sat next to Matt and played Graveyard Keeper for about 12 hours.
You did. You played so much Graveyard. I watched like 4 films, I think, and you were playing Graveyard Keeper the whole time.
Matt Jarvis, what films did you watch? Tell us.
I watched The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, which is the Nicolas Cage film starring Nicolas Cage as Nicolas Cage.
That was it good?
You didn't watch.
Didn't watch Morbius. Yeah.
No, someone in the aisle across us was watching Morbius, and I was watching them watching Morbius for a while.
You basically saw Morbius.
I watched that. It was it doesn't live up to the potential of it. I watched Licorice Pizza, which I'm
not bothered with that one, despite the fact that I do really like Esther Heim, and I'm surprised that she has gone into acting, but good for her. But the vibes of that is giving me like Woody Allen vibes, which
it's got like the filmmaking is good, the performances are good. I just wish I liked the rest of it, but I was like, this is just airplane movie reviews now. What else did I watch?
Morbius, right?
Oh, I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is one of the best films I've seen in a long time. And everyone to go watch it. It's so good.
I hope that wasn't the first time you've seen it.
Yeah, because I didn't see it in the cinema and then it was too expensive.
I know.
Me, and honestly, I think planes are the only place I watch films now. Like, there's just no time for them. You know, there's no time for them. I haven't got the energy for them.
But
whereas
the energy.
The energy. You're on a plane.
Everything Everywhere All at Once has been much hyped up by everyone on the internet for all time, and they are all correct. It is incredible. It's fantastic.
I loved it so much. I can't remember laughing as much as I laughed in that film like in a long time. So would recommend. Wheels, Graveyard Keeper.
Yeah, no, I played an absurd amount of Graveyard Keeper. But it's my favorite thing on a flight. So we flew over to Gen Con, for anyone who's wondering. And like it's a long flight to America. We had a layover as well. Like it's a big thing. Even though the layover was literally just us sprinting to another plane, trying to get on the connection. But yeah, like it's a lot of flying to do, and like as much as I like sitting down and watching films and TV shows and whatever for an amount of time, after a while I'm just like banging my head against the wall because I'm like, I need something to do. So if I've got a video game that I can just turn my brain off and just sometimes I'll literally just be like, oh, has the flight ended? Like it feels like it's been about 2 hours because I've just been locked in full on hyperfixation ADHD mode. And Graveyard Keeper, thankfully, I was hoping it would, but thankfully filled that itch. It's very, very good. It's basically Stardew Valley, but really cynical. Like, you are a graveyard keeper. It's also got like a really weird plot. Like you're like a modern day person who gets hit by a car and now you wake up in a medieval setting. Like it's really.
Is it like one of those ones where you see the advert for it and it's like the woman meets the guy and they fall in love and everything and they get married and then suddenly she's pregnant and then the guy is having an affair or something and then like he kicks her out and she has to build the house and. You know,
like,
how did you get this from Graveyard Keeper?
Mobile game ads.
Yeah, the cursed mobile game ads.
No, it's not that.
I can't believe the story is gone in this direction.
No, it's like it's very darkly comedic. Like it has. So obviously you get bodies that you have to bury, but you also have like an autopsy table, so you can get crafting components from the corpses you're sent, including you can like subtract the meat from the body. And then get like a fake royal stamp and sell it as beef in the tavern. Like,
I really hope I never hear the phrase "subtract the meat from the body" again in my life.
Or like you can take the skin and make it into paper and stuff. Like it's very like darkly comic and gross and like but also just very sprawling. Like there's a ridiculous amount of stuff you can do in it, just like Stardew. But like whilst it's obviously inspired by Stardew, like it does enough to sort of distance itself and make it its own thing. But yeah, it's very, very good. I recommend it. Although I will say like the like localization isn't amazing, so some of the writing is a bit like I don't know what this means. And then I've also been playing Cult of the Lamb, another darkly comic game.
Yeah, my son's been playing a lot of this,
which is essentially Animal Crossing meets Hades, which is great. You're like going out and doing roguelike stuff as a. It's very actually no, it's not Hades. It's Binding of Isaac. Like
That's what I was gonna. Yeah, I had it down as Animal Crossing meets Binding of Isaac. Yeah,
you can tell from like even like the boss design is like, oh, I've fought this before. And yeah, it's also got
like a big poo or something.
There's not a big poo. There's lots of like magic
It's
creatures.
more the demon side. Than
okay.
It's very
like
fly
side.
Yeah, it's very
the
like
poo platter.
You know, dark biblical and like you are the leader of a cult as well, right? So like it's got a lot of like dark religious imagery in it.
Yeah, speaking of poo, you can feed your followers poo.
You can make them eat poo.
There is poo in there. Yeah. Sometimes they can request it be their poo.
You get
it's consensual poo eating.
You get requests every now and again, and like sometimes they're like, "Oh, it'd be really funny if you made Johnny eat poo. That'd be really funny, wouldn't it? Go make him eat poo." And then sometimes they're like, "My leader, I have a request. I'd like to eat some poop. I've always wanted to know what it's like to eat poop." And it's like, okay, bud. But yeah, no, you're sort of balancing doing the kind of like standard roguelike stuff and like finding new like bosses that you need to take down and gradually progressing through things, and then it's roguelite style, right? So you're like getting new abilities outside of that you're leveling up. But then every time you come home, you've got like a little community that you're having to like cultivate, and then you have to make sure that they are constantly like keeping the faith and believing in you. Otherwise, if their faith wavers, then suddenly you become a lot weaker and they can like start revolting and leaving and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's really cool. It is like polished to a T. Like it's shining and it
looks great. Yeah, it's got really good like,
visuals, fantastic music, fantastic writing, really good. Like the gameplay feel is fantastic. Like it's got such a like love and care added to it. I wonder how long it's been in development, to be honest, because it feels like a real labor of love. But yeah, honestly, fantastic. Worth a go. And I need to play more, but I've been really burnt out. So video games have been a bit heavy at the moment.
I will say, is that it, Wills? Is there anything left?
I think that is everything. Yeah, that's all I've written down. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else I've been up to, but there's nothing that's coming to mind. Apart from that, my whole life this week, much to my chagrin, has been about Dungeons and Dragons.
I was going to say, before we move on, Coda Blair mentioned that they watched Dragon Ball Super : Superhero in the cinema, and I also, for the two people awaiting the return of Anime Chat, here it is. I also saw the new Dragon Ball Super movie in the cinema, and I thought it was not great.
What? Dragon Ball movie's not good? Oh my god!
Dragon Ball Super : Superhero. You start with a name like that.
Superhero. Oh yeah. Wait, sorry. One last thing. I also been watching The Sandman. Incredible.
Oh yeah,
is it good? I wasn't sure.
I remember like again coming home on a flight from like years ago, from like Venice or something. I read on my phone the entire first run of Sandman comics on my phone. Yeah, because I was just like this is really good. You know, like just hooked in because Neil Gaiman's an incredible author.
He is.
And it's a very, very cool series of comics. And it is one of the most like faithful adaptions I've ever seen of a work of art. Whereas it's also been like modernized and updated and made more diverse and like it's way more queer characters, way more people of color. Like it's just like it's phenomenal. Like they absolutely smashed it out of the park. I will say that if you don't know the story of the Sandman, like if you've never read the comics or whatever, I do feel like TV has it's harder to give it there. I can't speak. It's harder to bring the suspension of your disbelief in TV than it is with a graphic novel, I think. And like, there are certain elements of it where it's just like, I think this is brilliant. I can see why someone could think this is a bit goofy, just because of the difference in medium. But it's still fantastic.
I was into graphic novels for a while because I just felt, because I'm not really a fan of superhero like comics style, but I really like Image comics, for example, and Vertigo, R.I.P. I loved Fables, and I love like Saga, and you know, like Wicked and the Divine and everything. And then I just stopped reading graphic novels for some reason. But I'm tempted to give Sandman a go just before I watch the Netflix series, because I'm like, come on, you used to read graphic novels so much. Like, what's happened?
I will say, like, it's quite like aged. Like the original story, which sort of kicks it all off, which is in the series. Like the art looks like very 80s 90s kind of, like there's a lot of purple and green going on, like you can tell it's an old comic basically. And obviously all the character design is very of an era where Robert Smith was very popular. But yeah, like it's
era.
Yeah, it's still, yeah, true. It's
I
still
might
great, you know.
pick it up, to be honest, because I want to get back into graphic novels. The last comment I have before we go on to the main point of this podcast episode is there was a child in front of me, and their parent had their phone up and everything, and they put on for the flight. They put on Shrek the Third, and I was like,
yes,
I can't believe this is happening to me. On the
Please
phone,
tell me they
on
kept it in
loudspeaker,
vertical as
on
well.
loudspeaker.
I'd love it if
No,
they
it
just kept
wasn't
it in vertical
but
orientation,
I was
like even
like,
smaller.
You know when you can see like between the two gaps between the chairs? I was like, I sort of saw like the glimpse of it, and then I did like a double take, and I was like, oh my god, watching Shrek.
Perfect.
So there you go.
So Jan in chat has asked, isn't it, a few books only? Yeah, the first season is essentially the first two like runs of the story. So like you could probably just get away with just reading the first two series of comics, and then you'd have, if you wanted to see everything that's in the show, that's all the information's there.
Also, Matt Jarvis.
Hello.
What do you mean, yay? Shrek the First.
It's a terrible movie, but I celebrate anyone that in the year
films.
2022 is watching Shrek the Third on a phone on a plane when there are films like Everything Everywhere All at Once. Or...
Well, we didn't have like it's a short flight, so we didn't have like you know movies. So on in-flight films, so they literally just
I mean, most of the movie services now have like a download thing, right? It's like you could. What I'm saying is, you could find a film that isn't Shrek the Third.
Yeah, no, I know, right? But they had downloaded for their child Shrek, and she was loving it.
I would love it if it was just like a VHS rip as well. Of...
Do you think she was like, Mother, I'd like to watch Everything Everywhere All at Once? And she's like, no, you will watch real culture.
Well, first of all, you need to understand the multiverse, so here's Shrek of the Third.
I will say, the holiday, it was in a really nice hotel, but there was just a prevalent problem of people playing things on loudspeaker on their phones. And I don't know about you, but I don't experience that much like in my day-to-day life. But for some reason in this hotel, everyone was doing it. Apparently no one knows how to use a phone if it's not on loudspeaker. But we were literally sat down on the plane, and you know, then I started hearing the noises of the phone, and I was like, oh my god, are you kidding me? It's followed me onto the plane, and I could see my mum like shaking in fury, and I was like, oh no. And then they were watching some sort of film, I think it was a Pixar thing, and then like I saw them watching Shrek the Third, and I was like, okay. Luckily someone said, can you please turn it down? Multiple times.
Someone opened the window of the plane and threw the phone out.
And the kid.
I rewatched the bit where it's like the dad, spoiler alert, the dad dies, who at this point is a frog.
Oh yeah.
I believe it's John Cleese's voice, right? Yeah.
And he dies, and everyone's like sad. And then there's a load of frogs that sing "Live and Let Die," which is so bizarre because it's like that song has nothing to do with like.
Yeah, what's even more bizarre is Paul McCartney wrote Frog Chorus, so you have a frog song by Paul McCartney. Just there, it's just right there.
Tisha, why have you got one eye closed? He's just. He's just gone pirate. Oh,
Wink
now
at
you stop as soon as
you.
I
There you go, yeah.
Of course.
He was just winking. He was just getting you to.
He's
You
winking at
gaslighting
you
me,
about
Toto.
All right.
Right, come on, let's talk about Dungeons and Dragons.
Should we get into it?
Baddie Wrong Leg says there are bacterial infections that are better than Shrek 4.
They're not wrong.
Right, let's talk
Okay.
about D&D. Come on.
Let's get into it. So, for those who haven't seen, this week was Wizards of the Coast, the maker of D&D and Magic the Gathering.
My word.
They had their big, what they called Wizards Presents stream,
Everyone's got to have a Nintendo Direct now.
which
I want
was
a wizard present. Come on.
it was an hour-long thing where they basically had what's coming up for D&D, what's coming up for Magic the Gathering. We, in addition to this, I suppose I should say, so they had that stream on Thursday, which you can go and watch on YouTube, like it's available to everyone. Ahead of that stream, I sat in on a briefing where they ran through some of the things that are coming up. Interestingly, some of the things that came up, which is why I'm mentioning it, some of the things that came up in their press briefing then did not appear in that actual Wizards Presents. So if you read our stories over on Dicebreaker.com and also watch the video that recently went up on the channel, you will see information that you will not have seen from that video.
Exclusive.
Well,
Not exclusive, but hey, it's extra information. And we'll get into this, but I was kind of surprised by what they left out of that presentation because I think it's some of the most interesting stuff about the future of D&D, which is something that Wizards of the Coast is calling One D&D.
Yeah, here we go.
So they have said this is a code name, so it is not, you know, what the next edition of D&D will be called specifically. And in fact, there might not be a next edition because they've said, hey, we don't really consider it as having editions anymore. We just consider it as being, quote, One D&D, which obviously sounds like a bunch of marketing bollocks, but I think makes sense, right? It's the way that so many things are going. Like if you play video games, you've probably seen this where things are just moving towards a rolling
games as a
franchise
service,
now.
right?
Exactly, games as a service, exactly. So this makes perfect sense. I genuinely don't. I don't have any insight. I don't think there will be something explicitly called D&D 6th edition, whether it's called One D&D or not. I suspect they'll probably just call it Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I think they're just going to call it Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, we've had a lot of people in the comments. We've got someone in the live chat now who are like, "Oh, there'll be more editions." It's like I don't think what they're saying is that they'll never make a change to D&D after this. What they're saying is the business model going forward is going to look a little different, probably in a way that does not help the consumer because that's how these things usually work.
Yeah, as an example, I don't know if it was in the Wizards Presents thing, but in the briefing, they just refer to D&D 5e, which came out in 2014, as the 2014 Player's Handbook, etc. So they didn't really, I don't think they ever used 5th edition as the name of that game. They referred to it as the year and the book. Which is similar to, Wills, you might know better than me on this. I think it's what Warhammer does with its General's handbooks, right?
Yeah.
They just call them like 2020.
But at the same time, like they have a similar thing where it's like, you know, people still call it editions, you know, like the thing is like they're not ever going to stop their actual audience from calling it whatever the hell they want to call it, right? You know, like it's still Warhammer 40k 9th edition or whatever. And despite that, although at the same time, I think Warhammer kind of do like sub-releases as well, because they've started now doing like biannual releases of the rulebook, so they can just rinsing more money out of people. But it does seem like they're, I would assume, because especially as they're pushing towards more digital support
integration,
games, yeah, I think they don't want to have it be like, here is 6th edition. But also we're going to change it over the next year anyway because we're just going to continuously be updating the rules. So.
I think the other important thing as well is that they were very explicit in saying everything that's been released for 5e over the last 10 years will work with whatever comes next. And I think that is a shift from past editions. Like some things have obviously come over, but to be so explicit of like everything will work. Because obviously 5e is the D&D that's really like it's more popular than ever. I would imagine it has a bigger audience than it ever has done before. So cutting off all those people that have bought not just official D&D stuff, but all the supplements that are released by like other creators that aren't Wizards of the Coast, like all the 5e stuff, to just chuck that in the bin and then expect people to buy it all again, I think would be a ridiculous move. So it makes sense, at least in terms of like, okay, calling it 6th edition might then have people going like, well, that means I can't use all this stuff that is labeled 5e with it. So I think, again, that makes sense. And yes, whether obviously that's the optimistic route of like, well, that's why, because everything will keep rolling. But obviously there is the very cynical edge, which is a reality as well, where it's like, of course, they are now looking at ways that, they've got D&D Beyond. They have a virtual tabletop coming up. It is likely to become more and more like a rolling subscription or something that, just bleeds into different editions. And at some point, who knows, maybe you're paying £100 a year to just subscribe to Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah,
and that's books, that's D&D Beyond, that's this virtual tabletop thing, which we'll get onto in a second. There's a lot.
Yeah.
But I can see it going that way 100%.
I'm in two minds about this, because on the one hand, not releasing specific editions does make it more accessible for people to play, because it means they don't get confused about because we know what editions is, but but most people don't know what 5e is. What's the difference between free edition, 3rd edition, sorry, and 5th edition, etc. So just having, I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, this is how you play Dungeons and Dragons. This is where all the rules are. Just updating that existing, edition or version of the game, and making it as easy as possible for people to get into it is a very positive thing. On the other hand, I would say a little part of me is disappointed, because I feel like the editions of Dungeons and Dragons are really interesting in terms of how they chart the game's history, the creator's approach to it, the player's approach to it, and the character of what Dungeons and Dragons is. Because when you talk about people hating D&D 4e versus people thinking that D&D 5e is too not specific enough with some of the rules, all of that's just going to be lost now. You're not going to have that kind of discussion anymore. I feel like when they
yeah, I mean, yeah, for them it would be a net positive, but
when you take something and you make it like a homogenous kind of, this is our product now, I think you do lose some of the flavor of it, some of its identity, some of its character. Obviously, you're sacrificing that for the sake of probably more money, but also more accessibility, people understanding what it was. Most people just call it D&D, right? So they don't care about the specific editions. And also having the specific editions does lead to stupid arguments between people that can get nasty or ridiculous.
I don't know what you mean, Ian. I've never seen that in any YouTube comment section ever.
We've never experienced that.
No, people are normally very reasonable and very, measured when they discuss D&D and opinions on D&D.
Yeah. But I also think, you do lose some of the kind of the identity of that when you just chuck editions out of the window. Yeah, also, I think you lose some of the, as much as people, have had complained or criticized editions of D&D in the past, I think you lose that opportunity to do something really out there, really artistically interesting. Obviously, being to people, all the 5e stuff that you've got to throw in the bin now is obviously not very accessible, and not, again, you could argue is an excuse just to get people to buy the new stuff. But they're going to get people to buy the new stuff regardless. But it also means you won't have those kind of we're reshaping the game, we're taking a different approach to everything. I don't think they're ever going to do that again. I think with 5e, they've found a system that works, and 5e is pretty good. I honestly probably wouldn't play the other editions over 5e, but we all know my feelings on Dungeons and Dragons as a whole. But yeah, I think, you know, it's the safe option, right?
It is
the safe option is fine, but it's the safe option.
I'm kind of with you. It's like it would be really cool if they'd come out and just been like, a lot's changing, but I also just don't think that ever would happen for the reasons you say. Like, and I think in some ways, you know, D&D will keep rolling. It will keep being the behemoth it is, and there are so many options out there, especially now in terms of like indie creators, stuff on itch, stuff on like Drive for RPG, even where people are even taking parts of D&D, right? Like the OSR movement, like the old school Renaissance movement of people taking like first edition D&D to some degree, like generally like 70s role playing, stripping out the parts of it that suck and are problematic, and like making that into, like you were mentioning earlier, Wheels, it's like that's how you end up with stuff like Printweaver, which is kind of like grown out of 70s RPG stuff, but like has a completely different take on like how you resolve like combat or tests, or, and you know, that's fine. Like if D&D keeps rolling as it is, people that like D&D will continue to get more of D&D. I don't think they were ever going to be the people that would suddenly go out and pick up like the latest little release on itch or like the Lumen system or whatever. But in some ways, I guess it's kind of a good thing, because like those indies then, like if Wizards started doing other stuff and moving into other, I mean, maybe they will. Maybe at some point they'll be like, you know what, we're going to make a real crack at like Power by the Apocalypse, and now everyone's rolling 2d6, and we're going to call it Dungeons and Dragons D6 or something.
No,
I don't think that's going to happen.
Do that.
Yeah,
no
I don't think that's going to happen. I think those days are
happens,
over.
You can quote me on this now. If that happens, I will eat the skin of an orange. If they do that, I will legitimately eat the rind of an entire orange. If they do that, that will never ever happen. They have found their formula. We can talk about some of the specific rule changes. Obviously, it's hilarious because we're having this podcast without the two people in the team who are probably the most knowledgeable and the most into D&D.
We're missing Maddie and Liv. I will say that when we were recording the video that went up yesterday, like Maddie was like in her sort of presenter mode and being very jovial and talking about all the stuff that's changing, and then like in between she's like, "This is such a stupid idea." She was like, "I hate this. Like, they're making bards worthless."
I'm sure we will get Maddie and Liv's opinions on some of these changes, and I'm sure there'll be more changes coming out, like more details around that soon. But for now, we've got Matt Jarvis. We've got a few things just to highlight.
Yeah, I think what you just said in terms of like more changes will come. Like this isn't by any means the final form of this. They've been, Wizards of the Coast itself has been quite upfront in saying, hey, you know, like this is coming out in 2024. The core rule books, the Player's Handbook, the Monster. I don't know why I did Monster Manual second. The Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual and the Player's Handbook. They will come out in 2024 as One D&D, whatever this new version of D&D is called.
Yeah.
But they have put out an early version of some of the rules that you can go and play now. It's over on the D&D Beyond site. It's part of the Unearthed Arcana kind of releases, which, if you're familiar with those, they are kind of traditionally the kind of experimental D&D stuff that they put out, where they're like, this might be completely broken, this might be completely unbalanced.
Depending on people's feedback, we can put it in, which I think is a really good approach to any changes that anything makes to anything to a degree.
Wizards get a lot of stuff wrong, but I think generally like the Unearthed Arcana stuff, they get pretty right. They put it out there, they say, hey, what do you think? Like this is subject to change. And I think that's a good approach to take with this. I think they did something similar with D&D 5e before it came out. There was like D&D Next, and they put out a playtest of that for a while. It's pretty traditional in the tabletop role-playing space.
Yeah, they just say like, we won't make this permanent until we got an idea that most people. Again, these are just the people who are actually seeing it on Unearthed Arcana, and you know, as we all know, there are certain sections of the D&D community that you know. I won't say specifics, but I think it's a good idea. Anyway, Matt Jarvis, what are some of these changes?
Yeah, let's blast for a few of them, and we'll get like just a general quick take. So this is the meat of this is what they left out of that Wizards Presents thing, and I was surprised by that because I think, like I say, it's kind of the most interesting stuff, for better for worse. But they really glanced by it in Wizards Presents, and they were just kind of like, "One D&D is coming. Look how pretty our virtual tabletop is."
Well,
and we'll get onto that.
You even said that during the press thing, right? It was just a bit like, "Oh, by the way," like it's just like, what do
they
you
spent
mean,
much more time on it. But yeah, it was kind of weird. So some of the big changes that they have confirmed so far are things like inspiration is now like an actual thing in the rules. So obviously it existed in 5e, but it was kind of at the Dungeon Master's whim. So you'd be like, you did a cool thing, have inspiration, that will give you advantage on your next roll. In 1D&D, it's just what I'm going to call it from now on for clarity. But in these new rules, inspiration is now like an actual thing that certain abilities will grant to you. So it might be like you do an ability and it says X happens and then you gain inspiration. And every time you now roll a nat 20 on a die, you will gain inspiration. So as well as just being an automatic success, which is worth saying, they've made that the default now. It used to only be officially for combat that a 1 was a failure all the time and 20 was always success. That's now just across all rolls, which I think is how most people played anyway. So it makes sense for them to just make that the default because that's what everyone was doing.
I think a lot of these changes, like just to preface this, I think a lot of these changes will find like it's almost not even really a choice the Wizards had. It's just they kind of
it's how people are playing.
Yeah, as they quoted to say, like it's a reflection of where D&D is at right now. It's not necessarily like, oh, this is our big brand new idea. It's more just the case is like this is kind of what people do already. This is like what we're known for, despite it not even being the official way to play. So like we're kind of like, you know, just kind of allowing the fact that our fans and players have kind of decided this for us, and you know, it's not atomizing the gameplay. So like, let's pull it in.
Wheels, is this mayhaps the exact point where Maddie exclaimed that this is going to make bards useless?
No, it was the background stuff actually, which we'll
we'll get onto that.
That's interesting because two comments on the inspiration thing. Number one, on the one hand, I think this is a good idea because it means you can use more specific things with inspiration, which kind of makes it a bit more complex and interesting. But on the other hand, I kind of don't like this because inspiration was always a really fun sort of freewheeling thing that I liked the DM having kind of control over as to when and how it was given out, because it kind of gave the DM a chance to sort of personalize it themselves.
And it can still be that, to be fair.
Okay,
it's not like they're saying DMs can never give inspiration.
Okay, right. Okay,
it's just that they are now building it into certain abilities and
I've got no problem with this.
So for instance, one of the changes to humans is that when humans now take a long rest, they will gain inspiration at the end of that long rest.
Why?
Well, the way they described it,
humans suck.
No, the opposite, in fact. So the way they were kind of describing it is like, and I don't know how I feel about all this, but they're saying like, well, you know, humans in like fantasy stories often have like a quote X factor. And so this is meant to represent, I think what they're trying to do is make humans less boring and make people actually want to,
because
like,
who the hell
and make people actually want to play humans in a mechanical way.
They always try to do that, right? Because when you make a human in 5e, you get to choose like various proficiencies that you get to have, that you get instead of like all the more specific things that you get with like the other species. So with the other species, and again, I think they're changing this as far as I know, you would get like proficiency in this thing, whereas humans you could pick from like a selection of things. You'd have more options. But the fact that they're doing this with inspiration, my mind is kind of like, let humans be what they are, and like, you know. Anyway, we'll get onto the background because obviously that's a big change. I guess that
doesn't really fit the D&D kind of like modus operandi of like
you're always cool. Everyone's always cool.
Everyone's the most incredible thing you could ever be, right?
So that's how inspiration is changing. Basically, it, like Damien, it's still, DMs can still give it out. That's fine, but they are just building it into certain abilities to try and give it like. I think their argument at least was like, we're trying to give it a bit more like a direction of like, this will give you this, so it's not just like the DM thought that was cool, here you go.
Well, I think a lot of it is just remembering it exists as well, right? I think
that as well, yeah.
Put it in front of people's minds. Sorry, Matt. I think a lot of the comments that we got on the video, because we've interestingly kind of had like a lot of responses to, because they're not commenting on us, they're commenting on like what they think of the changes. So we've almost had like a mini poll in our video comments, which is kind of interesting. But a lot of the complaints I saw about the sort of idea of the inspiration mechanic is mainly around the sort of like random element of it, where it's like, I don't think people really like the idea of rolling a 20 instantly equals a thing that I used to get from good roleplay. Like it almost feels like it's cheapened it a little bit. I think.
But you can, as long as you can still do that, I don't really see what the issue is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they haven't taken it away, so
they haven't. Yeah, and it's again like with a lot of this stuff, people that don't want to use certain things will just not use certain things. The other thing to note with inspiration is that if you now gain it and you already have it, you can then give it to a party member.
That's fun. I like that.
Which is fun. And also, it's like there's so much with inspiration now that it feels, at least in my head, I was like, are people just going to have inspiration all the time? Because if you're rolling 20, you're getting it. If you're gaining it, but you've already got it, you're giving it to someone else. Like if you have a long rest, you gain it. Like,
if you're a human.
Yeah.
Well, then
I don't know.
Abilities that link to it as well. Yeah, I do wonder if it's going to become a lot more prevalent. Although you've still only got that one slot, right? So it's not necessarily going to be hoarded or anything. So
you can't.
I guess just because if you've already got it, it bounces off onto someone else. But
but again, maybe that's also a thing where it's just like people don't use it often. It's like health potions in Skyrim or whatever,
Maybe,
like,
it's the 99 potions in Final Fantasy. Yeah.
Also, and again, I hope I'm not wrong about this. With just standard inspiration, it's always just a D4, right? Unless you're a bard giving it to someone, and then you're able to. Those die go up. That's the only way you can get a higher die than a D4, right? Is if you're a bard and you're like giving it to someone else, then it can be higher than a D4. So a D4 doesn't really. I don't think it changes all that much. The only thing it will do is maybe make those borderline failures become successes or criticals or something. So
inspiration is roll with advantage.
Yeah, so 2 D20s and you take the higher result.
Are you thinking of the bards?
I'm thinking of bardic inspiration, which is a different thing. Which is a specific separate thing. No, inspiration is the roll advantage. Okay, that's fine.
So so that's one big change. Another one is that, like you hinted at, Wills or me, and they're changing character backgrounds. So they are part of this is they are absorbing the thing that was introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything a couple of years ago, which is that they are severing ability score modifiers from races, which have been long problematic. I don't think they're entirely removing some of the problematic things of races, but they are removing one of the biggest inherent things, which is that, like, for instance, if you are an orc, you get -2 to intelligence or something like that, where it's like the suggestion of like being a particular race or species like has like physical or whatever like inherent things to that race, which is just a load of crap.
I mean they got rid of the moral alignment thing, which they should have done a long time ago, which basically people had phased out anyway, like which meant that certain moral alignments were attached to certain species, which was in many ways worse.
It's also a hugely problematic way of that.
They got rid of that, and then in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, they did. The problem is they didn't get rid of it. They have just made suggestions, and they're like, "Oh, but you can do whatever you." Basically, they've said to the readers, "These are the ability score things, but you can do whatever you want, actually, if you want," which was always an option anyway. I don't know. My big problem with Dungeons and Dragons' approach to playable species is, one, they still call them races, which I think is a term which is problematic because the way we use race in like real life is to talk about, like Caucasian or, like not like humanoid species who are entirely different. Like a tiefling is a different being from a human, and referring to them as races, I think, is wrong. I think they should be called species. And like other tabletop role-playing games have done it. I think D&D should do it. I don't think they're doing it because the term race becomes so synonymous with
I think
what
it's
those
too,
things mean.
it's
But I
like
think
trying
it
to
would be
change class to career or something. I think would
Well,
have, which
the
it
only-
obviously isn't the same. But
The only reason they're not doing it is because they're cowards. I think they should do it. I think it's one of the issues that continues to be with a fantasy setting like like the Forgotten Realms has, where it's still tied into some of those racist archetypes that have been unfortunately a part of certain fantasy settings for ages. So they should call them playable species, but they won't. There you go. Anyway, backgrounds. You take backgrounds that affect your stats and things.
Yeah,
and
so
not...
the general idea being that instead of as it was, where it's sort of like you pick from like a sort of set like list of categories where it's like, what is your species, what is your class, what is your background. Now backgrounds are more of like this almost like sort of like build your own character kind of kit, almost like you've got sort of pre-made ones that you can select from, so it's not entirely up to your choice if you don't want it to be. Like I think one of the examples they had was like the Acolyte, for example, which again is just something that was, it's not necessarily reinventing the wheel. It's stuff that was available in the current edition, but like it's that thing of here is like a sort of a cookie cutter kind of version of like a sort of tropey character that if that's exactly what you want to be, then here you go. But you also have the choice to say, okay, well, I'm going to be this species, but then I'm going to add my, much like in Tasha's Cauldron, I'm going to add my ability modifiers however I want, and then I'm also going to have like a feat to pick from, because feats are now from level 1 as well, and they've got levels. We'll go into that in a second. We've got other background elements of like like things like languages and all that kind of stuff, whereas basically it's a bit less like you have to pick from this set selection menu, what's your starter, what's your main. Now it's a bit more like a buffet where it's like you can just go out and be like, all right, I want to grab that, here's like my budget or whatever, and then eventually you'll have a character at the end of it. It kind of like, it reminds me of almost, to bring up Skyrim again, it reminds me of almost the Elder Scrolls style thing where it's like, do you want to pick from one of these classes or do you want to make your own, in like Oblivion and Morrowind? Like it's that kind of, we have the options here for you if you want to play like it was, but we've opened it up a lot more now so that you kind of have freedom to do whatever you want when it comes to making your character. I think a lot of people probably are not going to like that. I think it's maybe taking away some of the like building aspect that a lot of people really like. There's a lot of D&D players who I'm well aware of who spend their entire life like generating characters that never get played, and I think part of that is kind of trying to make something interesting out of the restrictions that the character creation provides. Like I think there is maybe an element of when you give someone all the choice in the world and no restrictions, eventually it becomes a bit more boring.
Yeah, I think this will be the interesting thing, is that flexibility, like you say, like is it almost counterproductive in that, like, does everything just kind of become fairly like, okay, yeah, like everyone's fairly like multi-classed to some degree, or like, because it really depends what feature picking or what skill you're picking, rather than like, okay, like, you're like you say, you're kind of funneled down a particular route from the off, and we don't know yet, like, but it will be interesting to know.
I think it depends on how you play the game, right? If you play the game by making the most optimized character possible, you're probably just going to pick the same options every time, right?
Yeah, that's kind of part of the problem, I guess.
Whereas those people are never going to change. They're always going to be like that, right? Whereas when you've got the people who are like, I just like the idea of making a gnome who has like feats based around, I don't know, like improving their athletics or something, or using certain spells or things like that, and then they combine that with certain ability score increases or whatever they want to do. I feel like I feel like this. I'm kind of into it. I don't know. Like classic RPGs kind of always had this approach where it's kind of like you had a big old table and it's like, oh, this is intimidating, but the choice kind of allowed you to, if you were into being creative, allow you to create something that could really be interesting. Obviously the people who are unsure about what they're doing can always fall back onto the usual Oh, this will work, this will work, this will work. And we do that a lot with our creating class guides, or like using like picking from certain playable species. So you pick this one because this works better with this. There will always be those guides there, or those options, but it also allows, I think, personally, in my opinion, providing more options is never a bad thing, because to me it pleases.
I think for some players it will be fantastic. But I do think there is like a certain element maybe where because we talk about the min-maxers and then the people who are just full roleplay, but like there is a sort of in between, I think, where it's like people who like creating kind of like really like strong and interesting builds, but part of the fun of that creation process comes from the restrictions that are put in place by the character creation system. So it's like it's like building a magic deck, right? If you could just pick any cards that you wanted without having to have any kind of costs or whatever, eventually that wouldn't become very interesting, and you might fall back on, like you said, some people might just make the exact same character over and over again because there's like a definitive answer as to what is the strongest build or whatever. And like because D&D is essentially a miniatures game, like it's like when it comes down to it, like combat is 70% of the rule book. It's very, very specific. Like there's a lot of different abilities and feats and like builds and metas and whatever. Like I do think a large portion of the audience might maybe be underserved by that idea.
Well, this is to jump off that, I am interested to see, because a lot of these options seem to show that they're embracing, I guess, what most people do actually play D&D like, which is more of a story-driven game. Like it's what Critical Role does, right? Which is the most popular kind of like public-facing thing of D&D. They
do. Just to clarify, there are entire episodes of Critical Role, for example, that are just combat. So I still think at its core, Dungeons and Dragons is a combat game, especially if they're not making major changes to the way that it works. Because I always find whenever I come back to Dungeons and Dragons after a while, I'm still like surprised by how much combat seems to dominate the way that things work. So like there are entire classes or entire spells that are almost entirely not useless, but just not really built for those combat scenarios. And that to me is where it shows where D&D is still primarily a game about combat. But I'm definitely on board with making it more story driven. I know they've been doing that with their adventures that they've been releasing recently, like the Critical Role one they released, I believe Radiant Citadel also. They all feel like they're kind of leaning more into, you don't have to be, no, it was the fairy one that came out.
Well, by the Witchlight?
They're like, we're doing this revolutionary thing where you don't have to fight people, and it's like
revolutionary.
yeah, but I feel like they're leaning in that direction anyway. But
I would hope that the fact that the first of these like playtest materials they put out is literally called Character Origins and is like very focused around character creation, which obviously first thing you do when you get into D&D. But I'm hoping like they didn't mention combat at all, so I'm not expecting it to change. I think you're right. Like I think combat will remain largely as it has been.
There is still a large group of the audience who love that.
And again, like it would break a lot of those old adventures if you changed combat too much, right? And it's designed to be backwards compatible. But they are bringing in these character backgrounds. They're bringing in these legacy options, which I think were in like kind of previous editions of D&D or kind of harken back to that anyway. So for instance, the Tiefling is one they specifically pointed out, which will now have 3 different legacy options, which are like Infernal, Abyssal, and Chthonic. And Infernal
someone shouted at me in all caps for that. Apparently it's just Chthonic. I don't know.
Chthonic.
They had these before.
Yeah.
Where depending on what species you played as, you would have certain options for, I don't know if they called them legacies, but they were like, if you were a tiefling, for example, they had them with sorcerers actually, which is where do you get your sorceress power from? Like, did you get it from a jinn? Did you get it from like a draconic blood or something like that? And tieflings had that with, depending on who your because tieflings can be born into like families that they're not born from tieflings, right? They're born into families of other species, and they're like, oh, because of previous generations, having liaisons with demons or something. But they're making the free options official. What are you laughing at? Liaison?
You said liaisons, and then I thought of the phrase Dungeons and Shaggins, and I can't get it out.
Dungeness liaison.
Like you say, like this, some of this stuff has been in previous editions. They actually specifically said that, like Planescape, which is coming back in a new book next year, tieflings could associate with any of the lower planes, whereas I think in 5e they're kind of a little more restricted. So they're opening that up a little bit more, and again, they've got these character backgrounds that they're saying will be. They're very much designed around like, what was your life like before you became an adventurer, and then that feeds into like your skill set or whatever it may be.
It makes sense. What did you do? Yeah. What have you done up to this point? Where your life experiences are the things that affect what you're good at, not necessarily that you were born a gnome. Are you laughing at liaisons d'ingénu?
There is some very good puns in the chat.
Yes,
very much
stupid, sexy tieflings.
Also. I think we're all on board with the background thing, to be honest, because it's always kind of been the way that we kind of
and I think shift like again. I don't think they're going to like fix the stuff with race, species, etc. outright, because it will break a lot of the 5e stuff that is there. This is very much designed to work there. But I, at least as someone that isn't super fussed by D&D a lot of the time and plays other systems instead, the fact that they are shifting it more onto what has your life been like, what is your story, rather than like where were you born, like etc., which vastly problematic. So I like the fact that they are leaning more into like, hey, tell us your story, and that influences what you are when the story catches you now.
They are being Natasha Bedingfield in Unwritten, right?
One for the US audience.
Come on, that was a hit out there.
I'm not sure Natasha Bedingfield made it across the pond.
I will also say, like, I've seen a few people of color on Twitter talking about the new I can't remember the exact terminology they use, but basically mixed race characters, and it's like not great. Like it feels like they've kind of gone the other end of the spectrum, like very like I would have voted for Obama a third time energy, and it's a bit like ugh.
Oh yeah, because obviously you've got like half orcs, half elves, things like that, because it's weird because D&D are like, oh, these species are compatible. It's like lions and donkeys or something, like, oh, don't, like the elves and the humans can have babies together, and orcs and like I don't know what other species orcs. I think it's humans or elves.
It's basically anything humanoid.
But
breed. It's
but
the
like
problem. The problem is like whenever you
can't or something.
Whenever you get into
like,
any kind of like very hard and fast rulings on like how species
interact with with one another.
Goes into like race science, and it's like
which has been
not
like bioessentialism, like a long running thing through a lot of fantasy, including some older D&D books. But for the sake of time, essentially, we'll whiz on through some of this, because there are much bigger conversations to be had about a lot of this. Again, it will come out over the next 2 years at this point. But quickly, they are introducing the kind of what they're calling the upper plane cousins of tieflings. So there is at least one new D&D species in the forthcoming edition. Oddlings.
Oddlings.
So yes, and they are basically angel animal people with animal heads, and you can pick legacy options of like exalted, heavenly, idyllic, and they have specific suggestions of what animal head you have. But they basically said you can have any animal head. So this is the D&D furry.
Literally, no,
it's the one for D&D furries.
I think there's an enormous furry market in D&D, so like, why not, right?
I will say, obviously there have been specific furry type species in the past.
They said like, hey, the tabaxi's really popular. Hey, the turtle's really popular. We're gonna just make an animal. Like,
so that's bizarre. Also, there have been celestial type species in the past, like the one begins with A. I can't remember what they're called.
Asimar. Yes, in Monsters of the Multiverse, I think.
Yeah, and this is the weird thing because they're like, these different planes, the different worlds exist in one universe, and they released the Monsters of the Multiverse to be like, oh, we're now not keeping these separately. You can now like put these things and these things. And it's like, okay, now you're doing that, but how do you reconcile like having these species that are exceptionally kind of similar to one another? Like, okay, how do you reconcile these? Before they could just be like, oh, they just live in separate worlds, but now like they're insinuating crossover stuff is happening. So I'm like, okay.
I think like as well, like I don't know if you had a cat-headed Ardling, it's not necessarily gonna
be a
tabaxi, right? Because it's very much like a sort of, they are like humans with animal heads, like, so it's kind of got their own little,
I guess so, they got
realm of creation.
Anyway.
But yeah, it's I don't know. Again, they're gonna keep releasing new things and more stuff, and eventually there'll be an option for literally everything, and that's D&D, isn't it?
You can play as Thomas the Tank Engine.
Yeah.
It'll be like all those mods for Resident Evil where they swap in Thomas the Tank Engine instead of Mr. X, and that'll be D&D.
It will just look like Ready Player One. Carry on.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting there. Magic the Gathering is getting there. We'll get onto that in a second. We'll whiz through the rest of this because we are running a little bit long. And hey, it's over on the website.
The people are loving it.
The people are loving it. But there's also a lot. There's a lot. Like I say, I was in the 2-hour briefing and then they had an hour show. So there's a lot of this. Yes, Ardlings, new. Another change of class stuff, for what it's worth, is that spells will now be divided into Arcane, Divine, and Primal. I think spells previously could have kind of like some of those keywords attached, but the big difference is that these will now be shared lists from which the magic classes will kind of draw. So instead of having like a cleric spell list, the cleric might draw from the divine spell list, but another class might also draw from that. So again, they're like, the aim is to not silo off stuff as much. It will be shared across a little bit more.
The general thing just seems to be more you can do
openness.
Yeah. On the one hand, I'm kind of on board, but on the other hand, I'm like, some of the lists are what made those classes unique and kind of strong. Like sorcerers, for example, having access to a lot more, spells than potentially like another class, and that's kind of why you would play a sorcerer, is that reason. But then also I would say certain classes were exceptionally overpowered because of that, like clerics. Carry on.
Yes.
This is another rule that Maddie was not a fan of.
Yeah, I thought you would be.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a balance, right? And like, again, I don't know if these spell lists are out yet. This is just maybe something they've announced. But yeah, I think it will come down to how distinct things feel. Like at some point, is there any point in having a quote unquote class, or is it just like I have a character and they draw from this spell thing? So I would hope that they will find that balance. A couple of the other things they mentioned around specifically is they're tweaking stuff around healing to make healers actually kind of more useful. And for instance, there is a healer feat. But if you are a healer already and have healing spells, it's kind of useless for you. So they're tweaking stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's more the fact that they're allowing more people to heal, right? That's
yeah,
and that as well. Yes,
you don't have someone, which hopefully means you don't have someone who gets
just
shoved
healing
in that role. Yeah.
Yes, you are just the healer now.
You are the cleric healer. Yeah.
And you touched on bards. There will be a new feat. There will be a new feat for musicians. That will let you have proficiency with multiple instruments, and then that will tie into different abilities. So you can be proficient with 3 different instruments, and there will be a benefit called Inspiring Song, which gives inspiration to allies, which is similar to kind of bards. But they specifically said, hey, we are designing this so that it works with bards and complements them, rather than just like basically making away with bards and making bards pointless.
That's when Maddie was like, no.
Yes.
Also, I've seen a lot of people saying I'm quite quiet. I don't know why, because on my end it seems fine, but sorry, no idea. I might just be talking quietly.
Just talk louder, Wheels.
Oh no, that'll be a trouble, wouldn't it?
I kind of think one thing I really wish they would do with bards, because bards are that classic class where it's like they're kind of useless, but they're also the best class in the game, and it's like. I wish they would just link certain types of musical instruments to certain types of like powers or abilities and things, so then you could like dual wield. Like I've got a harp and a flute, and that means that I can do like primal based stuff or something. But then my flute allows me to do like divine things, and then bards just get access to the different spells, but they have to choose musical instruments to like decide what kind of spells.
That might be the way they're going with this. So
I would love that.
I'm taking from my own notes, so like bear with me. I may have missed some stuff. There was a lot happening, but they described it as like being more thematic than the past. So they've said it will be tied to additional ability. You'll have multiple instruments. So potentially kind of that may be the way they go with it.
Before it's like, oh, you would have a musical instrument because that bards just do, but you don't really do a heck of a lot with it. It's more of
it doesn't really matter what it is.
I guess when I cast a spell, I'm going to strum on this guitar. But if they actually like implemented the musical instruments in more of a mechanical sense, then that would make bards more unique and like more thematically strong. So you should do that, D&D. Listen to me, please.
Yeah, you'd hope like the fact that they specified like, hey, it's 3 instruments you'll be proficient with. If it's basically just like you have a list and it says guitar, harp, drum, but they function in the same way, that doesn't actually make any difference. Who cares, right? It's like you could just put that in your inventory. It doesn't really matter.
I think we're kind of touching on like the crossroads the D&D are at right now, because like I've just seen like Batty Rondax in the chat was like, oh, that would be cool, but then it would take a lot from Bard's hands away from character fluff. And it's like, I think we're at this stage now where
you have to make a decision.
There is almost like this kind of civil war of like D&D players where it's like, we want the stuff where it's like super open, I can do whatever, I can be whatever I want, because I'm not really that fussed about the systems. And then you've got the other half who are like very involved in the systems and want stuff to be like a thing that they can learn and get better at and build and min-max and whatever. I think now that, because D&D is such a mass appeal game, like I think they're going to struggle to find a medium between those. And that's where like a lot of the like, it seems like a lot of the changes are pushing them towards one direction, and that seems to be the freedom aspect.
Yeah, and again, it's worth repeating, this is all playtest stuff. Some of this is just us kind of speculating, because like we're just going by the very kind of brief stuff they've said so far, and it's all subject to change. And presumably if people are like, wow, this really sucks, like why did you do this?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay, I'm saying you would hope that they might go back on it. That at least is like their, hey, like we're listening to the fans kind of thing.
I mean, the thing is, like, being more free on things like playable species, I think is totally on board with that. Like, the point is being more free on that, because being a certain species shouldn't mean that you are good at specific things, for example. Whereas being like a bit more restrictive on some of the class thing, I think it's fine, because it's like, this is something that you've chosen to go down. This is your specialization, and it also means that the classes don't just warp into one another as one big blob, where it's like, oh, what's the bloody difference between me being a barbarian and a like a fighter? What is the difference between those two? Well, obviously we know it's rage, like, as being one of the primary things, whereas fighters have things like extra action stuff. But like, I'm more of an opinion of making the classes more specialized, because that to me is what makes like a class it's what makes you
and I agree.
Time I played a sorcerer, but next time I'm going to play a warlock, because they play differently, rather than just let's give everyone access to all the spells. And it's like, what's the point?
And I think like the thing to stress here is like, and hopefully this is what they will reconcile in the full rules, is that like, for instance, a plumber is specialized to plumb, they are good with pipes and such. They are very different to, for instance, someone that makes videos on YouTube. Like those are two completely different specializations. That's essentially what classes. Whereas like the thing with D&D races has always been that like humans are humans, right? It's like that's been problematic. Whereas the class stuff is just like, that's where the fun of that is. And so like you say, Mian, like having the classes be distinct makes sense both thematically and mechanically. Having like quote races.
I am
The
definitely
way they dealt
because
with
the
that
thing is,
didn't make any sense and was problematic.
Dungeons and Dragons comes from its origins are from wargaming, right? And the appeal of that is like, oh, I'm playing as a bard and you're playing as a fighter, but we combine together to make a powerful group, right? And I think you play other RPGs to get a different kind of experience, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm not a specific class. I just happen to like using a crossbow, but I also have this frying pan, right? You play Dungeons and Dragons because of that like class experience, right? Playing those different classes, having those rules attached to it. That's the benefit of its crunchiness, right? We'll complain about its crunchiness, but that's just our personal preference, right?
Yeah, if you took the crunchiness out of that game, it wouldn't be D&D. It would be a different game, and that would be fine. But also, people that come into D&D looking for a different game go play different. Like it just ain't that.
Game, please. Anyway, carry
on. But yeah, so I think we're kind of relatively, and again, it's worth stressing, like these are playtest things. They've said for context that they'll be putting out new playtest stuff about once a month through at least the end of next year. So expect to see a lot more on this. Like things will change, things will get pushed around.
I'm glad
you'll see more and get more context.
It is interesting that they are making changes. I would rather they made changes than not at all.
I hope they push it as far as they can without breaking the stuff that people already own.
I agree.
I'm going to be Uncle from Jackie Chan Adventures 1 second and say one more thing, because one thing I would really like to discuss is the virtual tabletop.
I was just going to say we should move on to that before we draw the podcast to a close, because we should at least touch on the other stuff, because there was a lot. One D&D is the big thing, but as part of that, yes, they revealed that there is a new virtual tabletop coming. They haven't given it an official name. They just called it a, quote, digital play experience, which is an awful way of referring to it. But it's basically... it's similar to something like Roll20. It is, as it sounds, a virtual space in which you can play D&D. You will have like virtual terrain environments, 3D environments. You will have miniatures that look like miniatures. You move them around. They should have like a ruler that says like, here's how many feet you're moving and you're dragging. And yes, it's running in Unreal Engine, which is the graphics thing that powers everything from Fortnite to that new Final Fantasy that came out. It looks good.
The biggest thing it's definitely got going for it, which, as you would expect from a giant corporation, is it looks very, very polished.
The Hasbro money is on screen.
Yeah, and it the graphics are fantastic. They've thought a lot about the art style, so they talked a lot about their tilt shift camera, which like keeps things looking like a miniature table. Like they very much want to mimic the feeling of looking over big plush miniatures on a table and stuff like that.
I'm glad that they're taking this approach rather than trying to make it look like a video game, because we don't want it to look like a video game. We want it to look like, a game of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah,
but
even to little things like you will pick up the pieces and move them. It's not little dudes running around. All that.
And you will roll dice, I believe. Like they said, hey, you'll be rolling dice in the environment.
And there's measurements and all that kind of stuff. And like it looks like, before we got on to all the horrible aspects of it, of what it could be, it looks like a very, very cool tabletop that I'm excited to try out. They also spoke about the fact that it's going to be quite modular, so like all the characters will be customizable. If you like buy an adventure or whatever and it comes with pre-made maps, you can take elements out of those maps and rejig them into your own stuff and all that kind of thing. Very similar to what like One More Multiverse and things like that are trying to achieve, but with an absurd amount more budget. So like very, very plush 3D graphics. The problem is with D&D sort of like moving towards this element of everything is going to be made by us, like they're essentially trying to cut out third parties from because they were like the quote they gave on the video was like, oh, right now players are like cobbling together different things for a not good enough
by which they mean we're not getting that money.
Exactly. Whereas like what we want to do is we want to buy all the virtual tabletop space, establish a monopoly and throttle anyone who doesn't basically pay us some kind of tithe. So it's very much like a worrying sign. So it's kind of like the bells and whistles are kind of, for me anyway, hiding what could be a very, very bad period for anyone who makes any kind of digital app for tabletop role playing.
The thing is, they don't have as far as I know, they don't have copyright over the concept of it.
No, it's not the fact that I think they're going to legally restrict everyone around them. It's more the fact that if they become the go-to Dungeons and Dragons virtual tabletop experience, which, you know, they will do by just having lots of money and making a very polished experience, and I'm sure it'll be very good. I'm sure for players, like, it'll be a really cool thing, but also it's like, it's worrying because it means that all of the other virtual tabletops, be it, you know, Roll20 or One More Multiverse or Tailspire or whatever it's called, and all those kind of things, whose backbone of business is built around people playing D&D online, it could be a really, really bad time for people like running those businesses. And it also means that with more power being put in the hands of the publisher, they can essentially create their own little walled garden where like everything is at their whim. It's, you know, it's like, it's the iPhone thing, right? Where it's like, if we just establish ourselves as the only option, then people don't have any choice but to pay through the roof for whatever we're giving them. And I can see it get down to a point where it's like, oh, you know, character customization is free up to a point, but then you need to start buying cosmetic packs, and then, you know, all of your adventures that you want to buy are actually going to have a paid premium on top of them, because now you need to get like the digital physical bundle to get the stuff that you want to play online. All that, you know, it's worrying. And I think whilst it might seem like a really cool thing, and I really hope people really love it, and I hope it's good, because, you know, you don't want it to be crap because people are going to be playing on it. But at the same time, just, you know, bear in mind all of the businesses that kind of like rely on making things around Dungeons and Dragons could potentially be in a really bad period of time, which is a lot of small businesses.
I think what would be interesting to see, and there's stuff like DM's Guild, which is like the marketplace of community content. I would at least hope, because like obviously they're making this thing, they're gonna squeeze every drop of money they can out of it because they own it, and you can see a hint of that in that they've announced that the Dragonlance adventure coming out later this year. If you buy it through D&D Beyond, you will then for the first time get the D&D Beyond stuff bundled with it, which is good in a way because you don't have to then buy 2 copies of that, but also you have to buy it through their storefront in order to get it. And so presumably when this virtual tabletop launches, there'll be similar things, which, you know, they're going to do that. Like that's what big corporations do to make their money. I think the interesting thing will be, is there potential on this platform for third-party creators to make cool other content and then not have that money necessarily go into Hasbro's pocket, but go into those creators? So will there at least be an avenue of, like, Roll20 will continue to exist, like people will make stuff on there, but will some of those creators at least have the ability to say, like, okay, this cottage industry of stuff around D&D, like you say, if someone is making like 3D sculpts, right? It's like people sell 3D printing files of custom miniatures. Can they sell the 3D print of that through like what's the 3D printer marketplace that I can't think of? Thingiverse? Yeah. Can they sell it through there or their Patreon, something like that? And then the people that back that Patreon, so that money is outside of Wizards of the Coast, can they also somehow get that in this platform? Because if that's where they're playing anyway, I'll be intrigued to see that.
Yeah, I would unfortunately assume not. Like, I do think that whilst there will absolutely be like a content creation platform on that virtual tabletop, like I think they'd be stupid not to have some kind of like community made content thing where they can alleviate some of the load of having to make all this stuff off to people who they can then just like get percentages out of on their digital marketplace. But I can't foresee them wanting to give up control of all of the profits of those. And like, whilst we're in a state now where like, yeah, you know, you can make an official 5e supplement book or whatever, and on DM's Guild, and like you can just sell a book, right? It's just a book. But as soon as it becomes a digital thing that has to be something that is compatible with a platform that Hasbro own, that's when it becomes a case of like, well, why would we let you make these models available on, you know, I know Roll20 isn't 3D, but just as an example, why would we allow you to make these models available on Roll20 when we can have it all for our own? And also all of our market is here now, so, you know, screw you. It's kind of like a Kickstarter thing, right? Which hopefully is becoming less of a thing now, but it's like, yeah, sure, you can go and crowdfund not on Kickstarter, but everyone uses Kickstarter, so you're not going to get all of those people who only look at Kickstarter. And I do think that's going to be like a bit of leverage that they have over now. And it worries me. Like, the virtual tabletop is the thing that I'm like simultaneously the most and least excited about, you know?
Yeah, I think it's like you say, like technically it's very impressive. Like, it is visually like it is a step above. And
Yeah.
again, Hasbro, $1 billion company,
Mhm.
you know, that money can be put to work in a way that a lot of smaller companies don't. But yeah, like there is a lot of unanswered questions. Like they only really tease the digital tabletop stuff. It's clearly a ways off. I suspect it will land in 2024 alongside the new edition, whatever it is of D&D.
They literally they did a fly through, and there was like an over the shoulder shot with like 2 pieces of UI in it. So I would imagine that they are not ready to show things off yet. And also, like another point which Mr. Farquad has pointed out. Thank you, Mr. Farquad, in the chat.
Mr. Farquad.
The Mr. Farquad, as to reference our Shrek chat earlier. Like, what are the sort of like running aspects of this? Like, what are the minimum specs to play this kind of thing? Like, are we now getting ourselves where, you know, if we were in a state where things like Roll20 or their contemporaries are potentially going out of business because of this, are we now becoming in a point where it's like, well, your PC's not good enough to play, so the only virtual tabletop that's still around, you're not able to get on because you're too poor to play D&D?
My heavy assumption would be, I don't think that I think they will lock down as much as they can to make as much money as they can. But I think because part of the success of things like Roll20 is because it is so accessible.
Mm-hmm.
I think as we obviously like things like Xbox Game Pass, you can stream games and whatnot. I would have to assume that they are looking at similar technology. If you can't just run Unreal in a browser, which I think you can to some degree, I don't think this will be a standalone app. I think that would be like a bad move on their part, because I think too many people who are tabletop fans,
polished, you know, like
it does look very polished, but you know,
it looks like a level of quality that I've not seen any kind of browser-based app use before.
Potentially, but they might be using they might be using streaming tech, they might be using stuff like that. I think for them to like wall it off, and again, Magic Arena is its own standalone app. You know, there are reasons they could do that, but I just think that for something like D&D, that they want to be accessible.
Well, Magic Arena is kind of a really good example, right? Where it's like I don't think Arena will be as taxing to run as full 3D models, like in a fully 3D rendered world. And yet, even that is a standalone app. Like, it's not something you can play in your browser. You can play on a phone, but like phones are powerful enough now. But also, you know, like, imagine the amount of assets that you need to download for these kind of things, like the amount of 3D models that you need to be like on your hard drive to be able to play this kind of stuff. Characters, like people's custom characters being loaded in, environments, all that kind of stuff. Like, there's a level of download that like they're gonna have to have some kind of premium space on your computer to make this run.
See, that's why I wonder if they'll just stream it from a server, because at least from like a lot of tabletop folks play video games as well, but people don't necessarily like have the latest graphics card. Like, a lot of people are just running fairly standard stuff or using an iPad, right? If you're not like a PC gamer, you probably don't have a desktop that is equipped with a graphics card. And I think it's such a huge proportion. They'll have the stats from D&D Beyond, how many people use a tablet or how many people use a whatever. I would just foresee it as being, but I don't have those numbers. I'd be really interested to know what that crossover is. Like, how many people do they expect to download a standalone app? Like, is it through Steam? Do they come out with their own like Wizards platform that's Magic, D&D, whatever, like tied into yet another digital storefront, Wizards Play or whatever? But we'll presumably we'll find out in a couple of years, if not sooner. But yeah, there are a lot of questions.
Who seem to think that we're kind of overreacting a little bit, and like I don't think that we are under the impression that, you know, come 2024, every kind of virtual tabletop online is going to instantly go under because they're not D&D. It's just the fact that, like, you have to remember that when these large corporations, who kind of do have like a bit of a monopoly on the market, are able to just like keep pulling away all the control over how people consume their content, eventually it becomes a thing of, you know, let's say that you're a person who plays on virtual tabletops a lot and you currently have a Roll20 subscription because you play D&D with your friends, but that also means that you can play things like, I don't know, Blaze in the Dark and like stuff like that, Powered by the Apocalypse games. Eventually it becomes a state of like, well, I need to choose which of these two like services I'm going to buy into, because there will be some kind of monetization into it, because, you know, they need to make some kind of money out of the service. There is a point where it's just like, well, I have to choose one of these things to buy, and everyone plays D&D, and it's so hard to not play D&D. Like, it's so difficult to get people to play anything else. I'll probably just get the D&D one so I can play with my friends. Like, there's a lot of people who are only playing D&D because, you know, they either assume or have been forced to think that it's the only option, right? So, like, I can't imagine we'll have too much of a difference when the virtual tabletop comes out. It's just it's not necessarily me saying that the sky is falling. It's just, you know, pay attention to this, because this could be like a really difficult time for people who make third-party content.
Yeah, is it like, off the top of my head, I think Roll20 puts out stats of people that use Roll20, and every time D&D 5e is, you know, the biggest game on there, and the second one is Call of Cthulhu, and Call of Cthulhu, like, fairly well known, like fairly well regarded, been around a number of years, bigger than D&D in Japan. There's a good video on Dicebreaker, will tell you. But Call of Cthulhu versus D&D 5e is not even, that's like a grain of rice versus the earth. Like, it's just different leagues entirely. As far as I know, I don't know the exact sales figures, but you think of like the influence of D&D, how many people know D&D. Call of Cthulhu, like, very popular, like, within a certain circle, like, but they are just wildly different audiences. So if you take the D&D 5e out of that, and Roll20's next biggest audience is Call of Cthulhu, that's a major shift. Like, again, even if it doesn't immediately sync them, like, that is a significant shift that could take place. And again, not everyone will come over. Not everyone is like, Roll20 offers a very different looking thing. Like, and there are other virtual tabletops that are not Roll20, because Roll20 itself is like a fairly big giant at the moment in that market. But I think you're right. It's like, it's worth just recognizing the heft that D&D has in the market, because it is unlike anything else. Like, even Grand Theft, like, video games, Grand Theft Auto is enormous, but it is still, you know, there's Fortnite, there's like, there are so many other games that are in similar leagues in a different way. D&D is just entirely different to any other tabletop RPG. Like, there is no real comparison. And when people are like, why do you cover D&D so much, or why are you covering this D&D thing? It's because D&D is like, it really is worth stating again and again. It is so big, like, and so many people only understand D&D. And if you're watching this podcast, you probably know more than D&D, because you're willing to sit and watch a tabletop podcast with a load of people going into depth. But the vast world out there only knows D&D. Like, it really is staggering how much, like, of the pie, like, everyone else just gets like a couple of granules of sugar from the top. Wizards of the Coast is chowing down on that pie and 20 more. So yeah, and again, you know, I hope this is really cool for people that like D&D. Like, I looked at this and I was like, wow, that looks really impressive. Like, as an experience, that looks like a major step for tabletop role playing and digital role playing. But yeah, like, the behind the scenes of it, there are so many questions to be answered and so many things that will come out, that it will be an interesting couple of years, and probably a couple of years after that, as all this kind of takes form.
Right here on Dicebreaker.com and YouTube.com/Dicebreaker.
Alex Meehan,
hello.
Do you have anything to add to this? I think, like, Wills and I have been on like a tirade of like, hey.
No, I just want to talk about Planescape. But
okay, let's talk about Planescape.
Planescape's good.
We can go a little longer on this. Like, this doesn't happen every week.
Well, we also, I'll just say now, we won't have a podcast next week because we are working on something incredibly exciting.
Yes.
Because there's just a lot happening at this point of the year.
Yeah.
So we might as well make it a bumper episode. But be warned that there's no podcast next week.
Alex Meehan, do you want to tell us about Planescape?
Yeah. So the alongside the One D&D and the virtual tabletop role playing thing they announced, they also announced the schedule of and this probably isn't everything, but just what they've announced so far of D&D content coming out over the next year or so. So they announced an adventures collection, which is called The Keys to the Golden something.
The Golden Vault, I think.
Yeah, something
was
like
this
that.
on their big Marvel graphic?
Yeah,
like,
this is their big Marvel
Q3.
graphic. Yeah. No, this is Keys from the Golden Vault.
From the Golden Vault.
That's it. which will be coming out this winter, and it's like kind of like what they've been doing recently with Radiant Citadel and things, which is just like a collection of
Candlekeep,
short
stuff like that.
Yeah, short like anthology of adventures that you can do, but they're all themed around heists, which I kind of love the idea of.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's great.
Did you play Waterdeep Dragon Heist? Anybody play Waterdeep Dragon Heist? That's the last heist thing I remember D&D doing, but that was a good few years ago now.
Yeah, but this is specifically sort of aimed towards that. In spring, they're releasing something called Big B Presents Glory of the Giants.
I will say, great name for a book.
Yeah.
Love that.
Which is kind of like a companion book to Fizz. Is it? Oh my god,
Fizzbang's Treasury of Dragons.
Treasury of Dragons, which was just basically a book about dragons. And as you can guess from the name, this would be a book about giants. So, just like, do you want to put giants into your games? Here you go. Here are a nice collection of giants. Yes,
it's a shame they didn't call it the Giant Book of Giants, but okay.
Yeah, they should have. Yeah, but then if it's not giant, you're going to be really disappointed. Next summer they'll be releasing the Book of Many Things, which is tied to the item of the Deck of Many Things, which is like a tarot deck where you pull cards from it and then stuff happens depending on what card you pull. And so this book is like directly connected. So I think they're expanding potentially what the deck can do. Because before it was just like, oh, lol, ha, you might find this thing. It's kind of a bit random, but this is sort of expanding on that. And then they're also releasing an expanded version of the Fandelver campaign, which is basically the Mines of Fandelver is like the OG adventure that came with like D&D 5e. Well, it didn't come with it, but you can find it online. It's the starter set one. So which is like a very bog standard D&D 5e adventure that's quite short, but they're essentially re-releasing it, but expanding it and including some new elements, including cosmic horror stuff, which is
it's a bit weird. I don't know the exact plot of the module, but like I was like, oh, okay.
I think Fandelver's always had a kind of nostalgic vibe about it, which is why I think they're re-releasing it like this, because they're like, oh, people remember Fandelver, they'll buy this.
I guess it also provides like a thing of like, if you did the starter set and you liked that, you can just like carry on over.
Which is amazing that they haven't done that to this point, where it's like it's a very easy thing to leap off of, but okay.
And then next fall, which is the thing I'm most excited about, which will be similar to what they released this year with Spelljammer, which is like the package of the setting book, the kind of adventure book, and the bestiary book. They're releasing a package based on Planescape. That's like that. So for those who may not know, Planescape is one of like the original settings outside of Forgotten Realms. Well, when I say outside of Forgotten Realms is involved, but essentially Planescape is like this big, it's like cosmology style setting where it's like there's a city called Sigil and it's the center of essentially this huge wheel which represents the different planes of the universe essentially. So when we talk about planes in D&D, we refer to things like the ethereal plane or the prime material plane and things like that. And that basically refers to entire... I don't know how to use the terminology other than planes, but like, where you know, the different planes that we refer to will sometimes refer to, the rules around this plane, like with the prime material plane being like Earth, let's call it, is like there's gravity and things like that, but then you have like other planes where there's no gravity or everything's on fire or something like that. And the main thing that's exciting about Planescape is the fact that there is the outer planes, which are basically the series of planes which are entirely sort of controlled by the different moral alignments. Obviously, the moral alignment system is not something we've always been keen on, and it kind of is outdated concept of looking at morality. But when you combine it with something like Planescape, which is like just full on, we're just going to completely go into this concept.
Yeah, it's very self-aware.
It's great. Yeah. Because it's like the different planes, depending on where they're based, will intersect with the kind of the lawful, the neutral, the chaotic, and the good, the evil, the neutral. And then depending on how they intersect with those, there will be different populations living in that place, and the settings will be dictated by those things. So like the abyss is like, you know, chaotic evil. That's where all the demons sort of hang out and do their demon things. And you don't want to end up there because it's not very nice. But then you've got like true neutral, which I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it's like robot creatures live there basically.
Oh, the Modrons.
The Modrons, yeah, the Modrons. But we probably best know it from a video game called Planescape Torment, which came out several years ago. I believe Will's has played. I've played a bit of it.
I've played a bit, yeah. It's one of those like seminal classic RPGs in the same vein as like Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights and all those kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Where it's like very, very, very well regarded, very well written. One of the original sort of like, wow, video games cool and interesting actually.
Yeah,
you know?
Where, you know, they took Planescape, which up to that point had really only just been included in like a kind of setting overview of here are the different places you can go, and it kind of expanded it into here's this epic story based in Sigil, and you interact with a different kind of, because Sigil is like the crossroads where a lot of these outer plane factions also exist in there. So you'll have demons, you know, and devils interacting, and they hate each other. And Modrons are about and everything like that. So Planescape is just really one of those settings that I've always been interested in sort of exploring, because it's just so out there in terms of, it's not just, oh, here are some dinosaurs, oh, you know, here are some spooky things. It's like, this is a concept that is obviously taking inspiration from places like, you know, Dante's Inferno, etc., things like that. But it's so kind of, what the hell is this? This is out there that I'm really
very
excited.
Wacky in a fun way.
Yeah, it's this, but it's not wacky in terms of, oh, look, it's a giant slug. It's wacky in terms of, this is like some deep stuff.
in to be honest, to bring it back to an earlier conversation, in the same vein as like Neil Gaiman's worlds, where it's like it's very sort of like fantastical and in some ways a little bit silly, but it really gives itself a lot of like, it doesn't take itself too seriously, but it does properly interrogate the ideas that it presents. You know, it's not just like, here's something goofy for the sake of it, kind of like Spelljammer, where it's like, you know, here's like a really silly world and we know it's silly and that's the whole point of it. Planescape is a lot more like, this is like a very, very fantastical, strange, like almost goofy world, but like we do actually really
take it seriously.
Yeah, we do actually really find a lot of interesting things in it. Like there's a lot of like sort of like very self-aware, very meta.
Well, how does hopefully a group of characters who are, you know, well-rounded people who have maybe varying beliefs on things, but aren't just like, I'm completely evil, I'm good. How do you then interact with people who are exactly like that? Like, how do you communicate
with Robert O. Cops?
Yeah, basically. How do you interact with that? Like, it's just such an interesting concept. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to Planescape coming next fall. Sorry, autumn. No, it's winter. Next winter, I think.
Sure. Next year.
Next fall. Next
never-ending series of books, aren't
there you go. There's some magic stuff as well. I don't know whether we want to cover it.
Yeah, let's whiz through it very quickly at the end. Most of it is like, it's stuff they've already announced. They showed off some of the Lord of the Rings stuff for next year, which I'm excited about. It actually looks pretty good. I like the art on those cards. The main thing they announced for Magic the Gathering was that they're doing a Doctor Who set, which is the next Universes Beyond. Magic the Gathering truly becoming Fortnite, including having Fortnite in it, because they've now done Walking Dead, Godzilla, Fortnite, Street Fighter, Warhammer 40,000. It's so wild the amount of crossovers they're doing, because in the 90s every license tried to have its own collectible card game to compete with Magic, and then Magic survived, and now Magic is every licensed collectible card game.
Yep.
I'm just waiting for the Pokemon Magic the Gathering set that truly marks the end of all things.
I don't know if that will ever happen, but
Pokemon's doing just fine.
I want a custom version of Saturn eating his son, the painting, but it's like Richard Garfield eating.
You say that, but okay. Well, Richard Garfield, I don't know.
Doesn't really have much to do with this.
No, that's funnier.
Yeah, it's true.
But they've done like graffiti stuff at this point. I mean, Secret Lairs are their own brand of marketing hell. But yeah, the Doctor Who set will be. It's for the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who. It's at the end of the 30th anniversary of Magic, so it's the end of next year. It will include Nkuti Gatwa's upcoming 14th Doctor, as well as all the Doctors to date.
Yeah.
Okay.
It will include the new Doctor.
Yeah.
Apparently, none of the marketing material has the 13th or whoever it is.
I don't think there is any Doctor Who. So they were like, they were very cagey about it will include elements from that series, and then they were like, the BBC will not let us say anymore.
Right.
So I suspect because there is no official imagery, I believe, for the new Doctor yet. Because I assume, like, it's been a long time since I've watched Doctor Who, but I'd assume things like costume and stuff like that is a big deal for Who people, right? So I would assume it's for that reason.
If he's not wearing the most amazing glamorous outfit ever, I'm going to be absolutely furious.
Honestly, most interested I've been in Doctor Who in a long time. Not Magic the Gathering.
Agreed.
Yes, just new Doctor. So yeah, that's kind of it for Magic the Gathering, although you wouldn't think it because they spend ages just running through individual cards during Wizards Presents, which, yeah, they take 4 steps forward and 7 steps back. Also, they put out a Spelljammer music album, I'll say, because it's a weird, silly thing.
But that on its own, I'm like, yeah, whatever.
Right?
But the Decemberists.
The Decemberist guitarist,
which
yes,
I was
Chris
like,
Funk.
what the hell?
And there's like Reggie Watts on there. There's the Freer Seas, like
odd.
It's apparently inspired by the Flash Gordon movie and the Queen soundtrack to that. I would say they played some clips of. I've not listened to that whole album yet because who's got the time? But they played some clips of those songs, and I genuinely thought like, you know what, these sound surprisingly okay.
Matt,
I expected
you're being
something
live copyright stricken as we speak. Like,
Come back.
Jarvis, just
Come back.
You're falling into the void.
It's my views. They're out of focus, and they are still out of focus. If I do this, will it break the frame wheels?
Nope.
No,
we're all good.
Hey, back.
Matt got spell jammed, says Angel B.
Yes, Matt got spell jammed.
Squished into spell jam.
Covered in delicious spell jam.
How have they not done spell jam as like a jam?
Well, it's weird because there's a lot of supplementary content for spell jam, but according to Liv and Maddie, our D&D correspondents, it's actually like really like full of holes, like it's missing.
Yeah,
and it's not very impressive. So
yeah, which then makes me worried for Planescape because I'm like, oh, I hope they put more effort into Planescape stuff.
They put books out so often. I'm just like, how much?
They're crunching, yeah.
This, huh? Anyway.
All right.
We've done enough podcasts, and I reckon
we've done enough podcasts. I think that is the highlights from Wizard Presents. We've obviously, like I say, if you want to know more about the new D&D, there are many articles on the website. There is a video on this very here YouTube channel, and there will no doubt be much more to come. Like I say, they're putting stuff out for it every month now until 2024.
Jeez.
Hooray for us and our jobs! I look forward to people on Twitter going, "Why are you covering D&D all the time?" And the answer being, because I would like to be able to afford
I'll be like, why are you such an idiot?
That's the Alex. That's the Alex me and take.
I know, right?
D&D.
Am I right?
Yes, but thank
why
you.
do you smell?
Liam, we got to go. I got to finish before my birthday. You know. All right. Thank you, Alex.
No, we're gonna go on to your
for
birthday.
joining us. Thank you, Wills, for being here. I've been Matt Jarvis. Thank you for joining us. If you've been in the chat, we are live every Friday from 2 p.m. BST. And of course, you can also catch us over on Dicebreaker.com and YouTube.com/Dicebreaker, the channel you might already be watching unless you're listening to the audio version of this. But until then, look after yourselves, have fun out there, and until we meet again, have a lovely day.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.